Each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it possibly, without claiming it, she stands up for all women by Maya Angelou. Hello and welcome to the Toy Talks podcast. Welcome to season 2 of the Toy Talks podcast. My name is Toy Washington. Thank you for joining me. Whew. I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what to say. All I know is, like you all, I'm in my house. This is uncharted territories. It's unprecedented. It is beyond human comprehension, but here we are. Situation like this is very humbling because no one gives a damn about how rich you are. In fact, your riches ain't gonna help you here, honey. You know, the most important people at this time are the medical professionals, the nurses and the doctors and all those medical professionals that get up every morning and risk their lives to save toilet roll hoarders, to save people's lives, to save those lives of people who are sick and who are directly suffering from the coronavirus. And if you didn't before, you have to have an overwhelming respect for those medical professionals that go in each day, work ridiculous hours for us selflessly. I've always had a massive respect for the medical professionals. When my father died, just how they were and how they treated us and how they looked after my dad. And to find ourselves in a situation which is a global situation affecting every single country in the world. We're watching medical professionals roll up their sleeves and face death every single day. And there is something so humbling about that. And, you know, we have to pray for them, keep them in our prayers. Any of my friends that are medical professionals, I've reached out to them just to check in on them and make sure they're okay. So yeah, it's a lot, and it's tough, I know, for many people who are indoors as well, who are suffering from depression. I've shared with you guys my journey with depression and the need for routine. Unfortunately, you're having to create new routines, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a achievable ask in comparison to the medical professionals that risk their lives every single day. Humility has slapped a few managers, hiring managers, human resources, hasn't it just? You know, I can't believe we're still talking about the fact that a lot of organizations are not equipped to deal with remote working in a world where technology is the leader in how we communicate. There are still some companies that are being truly tested by what's happening here. All those micromanagers have been, flawed, forced into recognizing that working from home is not a phenomenon. And just because organizations have not caught up with the times, sometimes the times are going to catch up with you. And here we are, told not to leave home, working from home for a lot of us. Some people don't have the type of roles where they can work from home, but where there are organizations that can facilitate work from home, they've been humbled now because their hands have been forced. Their hands have been forced, my dear, so that we can work from home and save our lives. So I just got off the phone with a recruiter because obviously, for those of you who don't know, but for those contractors, IR35 is being delayed until April 2021 as a direct response to the coronavirus. And the reality is the government have realised they're going to depend on contractors a lot more heavily now that our economy has been ruptured by this virus, and the workspace as we know it has completely changed. I will do in the coming weeks an episode on a global lessons learned from a work perspective, because I think it's really important that we discuss it here on the podcast, more so because I think fundamentally the way each business operates has fundamentally changed. The world of work as we know it has changed, and how we interact with our colleagues has changed also. You know, in a lot of contracts with businesses, they deal with, things, they call it force majeure events. So acts of God. this is now going to feature in a lot of our contracts with businesses and affect how we operate as businesses with each other. The reality is, there are going to be things that are completely out of our control and human comprehension, like the coronavirus. And where we are now is not necessarily where we thought we were going to be when we first heard about the coronavirus weeks ago in the first outbreak in China. Now, I want to focus a little bit about, what has been the effect, of the coronavirus in the world of work, because this is what this podcast is about. It's about teaching, educating, and navigating the world of work as a Black woman. And I want to talk about a little bit about the effects of the coronavirus with the world of work. And then I want to talk about some of the workplace myths. And some of these workplace myths that I was thinking about a few weeks ago have completely been undermined and shattered by the coronavirus. I remember in 2018 when I did my first Toy Talks live event, and we were discussing interview questions. And I think in light of what's our current situation, I think one of the questions you need to ask in an interview is about remote working. I think you are justified, and it's a legitimate justification now, that you understand if your organisation or the potential organisation you are about to walk into and probably accept a job from have the ability and the capability to work from home and work remotely. Ask them, have you got any questions that you'd like to ask? At the end of the interview, please pose your questions. And at the end of the interview, Toya will say, or you should say, yes, in light of, what's happened with the coronavirus, I think something that's become quite obvious to me is the flexibility within organisations. Therefore, I was wondering what your policies are surrounding remote working and how they are currently implemented in your organisation. Full stop. It's the way you position things, the way you ask certain questions. But for me, it's going to be, I'm a contractor anyway, so working from home is a given. But I think when thinking about the workspace and the working world, I think these are questions that you need to ask, because they are also safeguarding yourself. If you are still, after this pandemic, going into interviews and asking about remote working, and they say to you they haven't thought about it or they're still discussing it, that is a red flag. That tells me that organisation is inflexible, underprepared, and fundamentally lack the ability to trust their employees. I find that a lot of organisations that don't implement or have not implemented till now remote working and working from home, it's because they don't trust their employees. There's a lot of public sector organisations that don't necessarily believe in remote working, so they'll have a policy but they've never implemented it. And you should be able to work from home at least once a week, if not twice a week. There are some organisations that are a little bit more advanced and actually don't have enough seats in their organisation for the number of employees to force managers and hiring managers to accept remote working. But I don't think it's about forcing. I think this current climate serves as an example as to why remote working is really, really important. To be honest, my productivity increases by about, I'd say, 20 to 30% when I'm working from home. And that's partly because psychologically, you're not at work. So you want to show that you've done work, right, and that you're working. So you're more likely to actually do work when you know you're not at work being micromanaged. Gone are the days of micromanaging. I think managers that micromanage lack the ability to manage themselves, because you must have a lot of time on your hands if you've got the time to micromanage said employees. There has to come a point now, I think, where we have a shift from looking at our employees as though they're about to do something completely fundamentally tragic that will sink the business's share prices. Trusting your employees is even more fundamental now more than ever. You've got to trust that. Don't get me wrong, people will abuse working from home. But I truly believe that that's a minority. It's not the majority. And I think working from home is specifically important in situations whereby it might not necessarily be a pandemic. Say if there is an office fire or something like that. So I think it's important that in interviews that this poses as one of the questions that you ask the interviewers about how they implement working from home. So where I'm contracting at the moment, I would say that they have working from home, but for some reason they don't trust their employees. And now, obviously, I'd say about 95% of the staff are working from home, be it perm staff or contractors. We use Skype to communicate. And what happens is if you leave the laptop idle, the Skype, rather than showing you online, it will show you as away. And it's really funny because the hiring manager of the department in which I'm working at, I don't know, I think he doesn't have a lot of work to do. I think he doesn't have a lot of work to do. I've never seen the man wash his hands before. So he's just sitting at his laptop and literally he's messaging people and said, is everything okay? I can see that you're not online. And he done it with me. And in fact, I wasn't online, but he sent me an email. He goes, you haven't been online. He gave me the time, like 2 hours, 24 minutes. And I think he put 13 seconds. And I sent him an email. I says, my Skype actually doesn't work. I was forced to do a system upgrade to the computer. I actually spoke to the COO before I started working from home and informed him that there was an issue with my laptop. I spoke to the head of IT who told me that he could not remotely fix my laptop. Therefore, you will have to trust that when I'm working from home, I'm actually working from home. I've never missed a call. I've never missed a conference call or a conference call team meeting, ever. So this is the current situation. I'm telling you right now, this man never responded to me, I'm never going to be the one that you're going to do that rubbish with. You have an issue, managers, with control. And humans are not there for you to control them. You are supposed to be able to manage people without feeling that you have to control their every move. And I really do think that remote working is a true test of these micromanagers who feel like they don't have a job if they're not micromanaging people. It's a sad state of affairs when a lot of these managers who, let's be honest, probably white middle class, I say probably, but it's a fact, white middle class, who think that they're herding cows. We're not cows. And in fact, you're now relying and seeing your workforce in a very different light now that you have to depend on them to keep your business afloat. Boy, has the tables turned. Work as we know it has fundamentally changed, and we will realise this as everything resumes back to normal, which I know it will do. It will take some time, but it will do. But from you, a possible employee, a contractor, a fixed term contractor, I think it's really important that you now start positioning yourself. Now, when I was asked on an Instagram live, under the current climate of the way things are, how can I better my work prospects? And I thought that was a really interesting question, because I feel like this is an opportunity. This is a time for you to kind of research around your chosen field and your chosen career. If you are looking at maybe changing jobs or changing career, this is the opportunity now where you can use the internet, use some resources and have a look and see what's going on in the market. Now, when I say in the market, I know that when it's come to recruitment, there's a lot of freezes on recruitment. I know that a lot of roles are being pulled. I get all of that. But this is also an opportunity for you to now start positioning yourself. Remember I said in my last episode, episode 13, where I said that no condition is permanent. This too shall pass. But how have you utilized this time, this opportunity where you are at home? How have you used it to your advantage? Now, from a work perspective, I've always told people, albeit through my Snapchat, you need to be the subject matter expert in what you do. Because once you become the subject matter in what you do, you then have leverage. And once you have leverage, you have power. And once you have power, you are able to bargain from a position of strength. What do I mean by that? Listen, even before this epidemic, this pandemic of coronavirus, I think that people have shirked the responsibility of growth. And rather, you've placed that responsibility on your managers. And if you guys will remember, I told you in a earlier podcast episode that your manager is not the key to your success. That was episode 4. The key to your success is you, and how you are going to position yourself and take this opportunity to be able to not only become a subject matter expert, but take the time to really truly think and map out your career objectives, because until you take the time to do that, you're going to find yourself in a perpetual cycle of the same old thing. Now, when talking about subject matter expert, I wanted to give you guys an example and draw on one of my experiences. So I was a perm member of staff at a particular organisation, and I'd been there for almost 2 years. I found out that a male member of staff who was junior to me was earning about, I think it's about 5,000 more than me, but he was earning more than me nevertheless. And I was enraged. I was so angry. I was so upset about it, specifically because I trained him and I continued to train him because he just did. I don't know how he got the job, but hey, whatever. And I started thinking about my career and what I wanted to do. I had become a subject matter expert. At that time, I was a contract specialist, specializing in contracts. And that was everything from negotiating, drafting, you name it, contract-wise, I do it with my eyes closed. And I genuinely love contracts. And to cut a long story short, I had a few conversations with people who were contractors in that same field. I set up my limited company, got an accountant, and decided to become a contractor full time. And I found a contract, and I tendered my resignation. And they were shocked, this particular organisation. I couldn't understand why they were so shocked, because the new head of department that had joined a few months prior had basically told my line manager that my face didn't fit and that I don't smile and all this stuff, that he critiqued me about everything other than my work. It was because I didn't lick his ass like everybody else was doing. So he couldn't understand, how can this black woman not brown nose me like everybody else? Who does she think she is? Well, I think I'm the shit, and I think I'm better than here, and I think I'm worth something. And actually, if I've got to lick your ass for you to notice me, then that speaks more about you than it does about me. So I ended up leaving. Now, when I left with all that knowledge around what I did and the particular business unit in which I was doing the contracts for. All that knowledge was in my head. And yes, I did a handover, but let's really be real. Unless you actually know what you're doing, a handover means nothing. Handover means these are the things I couldn't do. I'm handing them over to you. A handover is nothing more than a document of things that you couldn't do while you were there because of whatever reason, or things that couldn't be closed. And 9 times out of 10, a lot of these organisations think that you should be so grateful to be there. Therefore, they don't prepare for the eventuality that you may leave. They probably have no structure in place for recruitment or whatever. Anyway, they messed up my employment contract as well, because they should have made sure that my notice period was 3 months, because even though I wasn't senior in title, I was senior in that department. And in fact, my termination was 4 weeks, and that's what I tailored to them. And then they tried to tell me I had to work 3 months. I says, I don't. I legally, from a contractual perspective, work 4 weeks. In fact, if I don't want to work my notice, there's nothing really you could do. It doesn't bode well, of course, but contractually, from a professional perspective, I just need to give you 4 weeks. And that's what I did. And obviously it wasn't enough time for them to replace me or whatever. Gave my handover. I had a really lovely send off, cards, flowers, you name it. And I left. And then I was contracting in the public sector. Didn't really like it at all. I was like, public sector definitely isn't for me. And as the weeks progressed, I could see that the organisation I just left had advertised my role but they wanted a contractor in for the short term. And I saw the day rate and I was like, well, I'll come back as a contractor then. Now, remembering that I was a subject matter expert in what I do, and I had leverage. So I contacted my old line manager and she said, Toya, if it's left for me, I'd hire you tomorrow. But it's the head of department. He has to make that decision. Leave it with me. She had a conversation and he jumped at it. But rather than give me the advertised day rate, he wanted to give me the equivalent of what my day rate would be when I was a perm, which would have been about £200 or £300 less than what was advertised. which is neither here nor there. Like I would be coming back as a contractor. You can't now rely on what I was on when I was a perm. It doesn't make any sense. But because I had the leverage, because I had all the knowledge, because they needed me, because it would have been okay for them to hire somebody externally. But let's really be honest, by the time they've trained that person, that's if they've got the time to train that person, the work's still not getting done. So when my former line manager came to me with that, I said, that's not going to happen. Come on, you know that. She goes, well, I had to ask. It's not from me. It's the head of department. She went back to him within 24 hours. They basically said that they would have me back as a contractor on a day rate. That day rate is, I would say, 50% more than what I was on as a perm earning a salary. So they could have just increased my salary as a perm, because when I terminated my contract with them as a perm, I said to them, I know XYZ earns more than me. Oh yeah, we can negotiate it, we could talk about it. I didn't want to talk, I needed some action. And since they weren't ready to act, I was ready to act. I'd already secured a contract role, set up my limited company. Au revoir, I was out of there. Anyway, I ended up going back as a contract consultant. So that's an increase, that is a higher title. And a day rate that was pretty good for somebody starting out as a contractor. And I was on more than what I was as a perm. And when I came back, you could see the look on the head of department's face. You know, like a slapped bum, or like he'd walked into a window, squashed. You know, they really underestimate us as black women. They do. Some of these employers, some of these white middle class employers, they don't rate us at all. And you could see in his face that he was seething of the fact that he felt like I had one up on him. But I was just using the leverage that I had. I was the subject matter expert in what I did. I was well respected in the organisation, well respected within senior management. I got the job done, signed multi-million-pound contracts. Like, my work spoke for itself. But more importantly, I placed myself in a position that I was hard to replace. No one's irreplaceable, but you can be bloody hard to replace. And I was. They knew that it worked in their interest if they had me back, because they didn't have to train me, nothing. I'd hit the ground running because I'd only just left. I'd left, a month or two prior. It was through this that I realised even more so that if you don't make yourself the subject matter expert on what you do, and part of that is knowing more than your manager. If you don't do it, you won't have enough leverage to be able to negotiate certain things. And that could be anything from a title change to a salary change. But you need to be able to be one step above or one step in front of what the average baseline is. I was training junior members of staff in the team. In fact, before they would go to my line manager, they would come to me. And yet they didn't know my worth until I stepped out. And when I contacted the line manager and proposed coming back, my worth then increased. And they could have mitigated that. You see, employers don't rate their employees sometimes because as long as we make them look good, they don't really care. They think that some organisations are the best place to work. You'll see a lot of organisations, even recruitment agencies, will now put pressure on people and say, oh, you know, the current climate, you just have to just take what you're given. Who says you have to take what you're given if that's not what you want? I'm all for being in charge of your career. I'm all for making sure that you do the necessary research and work that you need to do to be able to, number one, hold on to your wrong. Number two, be a cut above the rest. What is your unique selling point? Everybody has them, and it's sometimes more than one. So my unique selling point is understanding contracts, understanding how to use contracts, and being able to negotiate these contracts, put them in place, and often draft them from scratch. I have negotiated with high-level CEOs of companies. I know how to negotiate contract clauses. I know how to compromise. I know how to work with other people. I've trained junior members of staff to become seniors. What is it that you're known for? You know, some people say, you know, I just want to grow in my organization, but you don't put yourself in a position whereby you do grow. Getting the respect of senior managers is not shouting from the rooftops the things you've done. It's doing these things and achieving those things and keeping a record of them. Listen, I had a record of everything I achieved in that organization, because that fundamentally fueled my reasoning for wanting to become a contractor as well. I feel like we sometimes sell ourselves short because we do have this subservient mentality, which I touched on in the last episode, whereby our parents come over as first generation immigrants and we are the children of these first generation immigrants, and then we are then indoctrinated into this survival mentality, and therefore we are grateful to have a job. And this grateful mentality, I tend to think, holds us hostage from achieving the things that we are supposed to achieve. It holds us hostage from aspiring to more and wanting more. And I think that when you allow that subservient mentality to arrest your ambitions, you become basic. You become like everybody else, and you become unnoticeable because you just blend in. But as soon as you take charge of your career, as soon as you choose to be a subject matter expert, as soon as you choose to fully embody your career and fully be in control of your objectives and your aspirations, that's when you are able to make changes in your career. There came a point in my career where I realized that I needed to add something. So I got all my law qualifications. I did my law degree. I went to law school. I did a master's in law. And then I could see that the commercial space was changing. And remember, I had finished education back in 2010. I was like, okay, in order to kind of be, you know, have the edge on a lot of people who are maybe, you know, going for similar jobs to me, I need to do something else. And I decided that I would do my qualification in procurement and supply, so the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, and I did my level 4 procurement. And it was difficult. I was balancing working full-time and studying, and it is not a joke. And I remember chartering it on my Snapchat, and, you know, the difficulties I was going through, and remembering also that I'm dyslexic as well. So, studying and working had its challenges. And once I got my qualification, I can't remember how many exams it was. I think it was maybe about 6 exams. After doing all 6 of those exams and doing really, really well, actually, and achieving it, when I was going into interviews now, it was different. We were talking about a different pay bracket. We were talking about different responsibilities. And more importantly, I was getting those interviews now because I wasn't just good at contracts and embodied contracts. I was really good at procurement, the strategic side of businesses buying goods and services. And I could do the full procurement life cycle, from conception to contractualizing them to signing the contract and to get the goods and services into businesses. I made myself into someone who, when you saw my CV, you were inviting me for an interview. And I think that what I learned from that is sometimes you have to put yourself in difficult situations. You have to go back into education. You maybe have to do a certain training course. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is have the edge. I didn't wait until my managers used their training budget for me. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't ask for direction from these managers who often the only direction they know is into the canteen. I had to take charge of my career. And part of taking charge of your career is sometimes looking in the mirror and asking yourself some really difficult questions. Like, am I even in the right career? Am I happy here? What comes naturally to me? Why am I finding it so difficult? Did I even want to do this career? Career changes are normal. You know, I shared before how I was apparently supposed to be this lawyer. Got 6 months into my training contract. I'm like, hell to the no. And I've never looked back. Now, gone are the days where we have to be having face-to-face interviews. After speaking with a recruitment consultant today, organisations are now implementing video conferencing and using video conferencing for interviews. So where maybe they had it before with external clients, now they're using it to interview potential candidates. And that's across the board, contractors and perm alike. Now, there's sometimes some interviews whereby maybe you're stuck in traffic, maybe you've got childcare issues. You should be able to have interviews over Skype or any other video conferencing software that people use. So when I am being put forward for contract roles, I will ask that question. How are we doing interviews? Is it face-to-face or is it video conferencing? Because everybody's using it now. Oh yeah. They asked me today on the phone, oh, Toya, have you got Skype or what other video conferencing facilities do you think that you'll be able to download in case we're doing face-to-face interviews? I said, you name it, I will download it. Yes, gone are the days now where they have to do it face-to-face so they can see how you've positioned your hair or what trouser you're wearing. In fact, you can go to video conferencing interviews, maybe even over Skype. Maybe not even have any trousers on, just be sitting there with a nice shirt, your knickers, and just be looking at them there. Yes, things have changed, and now we're looking at businesses like, are you going to catch up? Because you ain't got no choice now. Not too long ago, I had a dilemma on my Snapchat, and as I was helping this young lady with her dilemma, she said, you know, Toya, I've been following you for a while on social media, especially on Snapchat. And you've shared with us at different stages about the myths about workplaces. And I think it'd be really good if you did an episode on your podcast dispelling, confirming, or elaborating on certain myths that people hold in their mind about the workplace. And I thought, you know what, that's a fantastic idea. And given the current state of things and how businesses may be leveraging positively or negatively the current climate of things, I thought it'd be really good if I do that. Now, I know a lot of people who have been made redundant as a result of the coronavirus. And the first question I ask is, do they have a perm contract? If they do, how long have they been working in that organisation? And what does their contract say about redundancies? I can't give you advice about redundancies if you haven't even looked to your first port of call, which is your employment contract. Now, as a contractor, we don't have anything like redundancies because we fundamentally, as contractors, work for ourselves. Some people work through a limited company, and in that example, you wouldn't have anything to do with redundancies. You can't be made redundant if you work through a limited company. Now, for people who work through an umbrella company, there are contracts that you have between you and the umbrella company. And again, I would ask you to go and look at that contract and see what it says about redundancies. But if what I know is to be true, I don't really think that they cover redundancies for contractors who work through an umbrella company. So before anybody writes to me or with a dilemma to do with redundancies, I would ask you to please look at your employment contract. What does it say? So for example, most employment contracts will require you to have worked a certain amount of time before any type of redundancy clause kicks in or redundancy package kicks in. More often than not, you need to do a consultation. And I would say that if a consultation has not been done, they could be leveraging the current circumstances, i.e. they can't do a consultation because, everyone's working from home. And then I would ask the question, well, you can do a consultation. You can do it through video calling, through Skype. But yeah, I'm going to leave that there. I'm sure I will have a few dilemmas about redundancy, and we can take a real life example and I can use that to demonstrate how you enforce redundancy rules. So when talking about workplace myths, I want to talk about references. People are scared to terminate a contract, resign, because they think they're going to get a bad reference, or if people don't work their full notice, they think they're going to get a bad reference. Now, I'm going to say this. Most organisations do not or will not give you a bad reference because they are absolutely petrified of you suing them in civil court for defamation. And a lot of organisations have been sued because of it. And so what has happened is other organisations have learnt the lesson. And rather than give a more personal reference, what they do is give a general one. And it sticks to the facts. your name. They can confirm your name, what role you were doing, and how long you were there, and that's it. In fact, I would go as far as saying that in my career, in the last 10 years, that's how my references have looked. And when you want more personal references, they call them character references. And in that case, you're in charge of who that character reference goes to. And I would think that you've got the good sense to put down a character reference of somebody you know personally, i.e. know through work, and somebody you can have a chat with and say, hey, I've got a character reference coming through. Would you mind doing it? So bad references almost don't exist, because the idea that an organisation could give a bad reference about you and you can then sue them for defamation of character is too great a risk for any organisation to take. So they would give you just a basic standard reference. Now, what organisations do have the ability to do is actually say they won't give you a reference. There's no legal obligation for any organisation to give you a reference. They just won't give you a bad one. So if an organisation says they're not going to give you one, you can't force them to. But more likely than not, they'll just give you a standard one. Now, if you pay tax via PAYE, so this is mainly for per member of staff, you, when you leave, will be given a P45 after your last paycheck. And on that P45, many of you know, it will have the organisation you worked at, etc., how much tax you've paid. And you're supposed to hand in that P45 to your new employer. Now, you would hand that into human resources. And some people say, oh, but what happens if I don't have a P45? Then you fill out a P46. There's been times when I don't want organisations maybe to know where I've worked before. Maybe I've left it out of my my CV. I'm going to be completely honest here. Then I tell them, oh, I've lost my P45. I fill out a P46. Any tax I've overpaid. One thing about HMRC is if you've overpaid tax, they will give it back to you. HMRC are honestly, for all the negative stereotype associated with them, I will say that anytime they owe you money, they give it to you. That's why when you owe them money, they come looking for you real quick. So that's what I'll say. I'd also say is don't be worried if you have maybe left off a recent employer from your CV, and therefore you're worried that if you hand in a P45, it will have that employee's details and then they'll find out. I've been in that situation too. Never happened. But I would say if you're really worried about it, just say you don't have one and fill out a P46. You can download a P46 on the HMRC website, or if you Google P46, you can download it and fill one out. Or you just ask the new human resources of the company you're going to if you can have a P46 because you haven't got a P45. Just make up an excuse like you've lost it or you're still waiting for it, whatever the case is. There's no problem with you filling out a P46. I've dealt with this before on a previous episode, but I'm going to reiterate it again for the purposes of this particular segment of the podcast. Human resources are there to resource humans at an organisation, okay? Human resources work for the company. They don't and will never work for you. So when you think you're confiding in human resources, you're actually confiding in the organisation, which is not really confiding. Human resources are there to safeguard the interest of the company. And in doing that, you may think they're on your side, but they're not. If you think about it, who employs the human resources? It's the business that you also are employed by. So why do you think that human resources have a special place in their heart for you? I will not know. Understand that confidentiality and things like that are supposed to be implemented by human resources, but they don't. They don't implement the very things that they expect from the employees that work for the organisation. And it's really important that you don't rely on them, i.e. make sure you've got your burn folders and your feedback folders. We've spoken about that on previous episodes. And don't rely on human resources to put forward or to defend you. That's your job. I just want to add that some people are really worried that maybe they inflated their salary or previous salary in a previous role to a new employer, and therefore when they submit their P45, they're worried that the new employer will find out. Listen, the amount of people that human resources have to look after, they're really not looking at your P45 that stringently. In fact, I think sometimes we give credit to HR, and while some of HR are okay, I'm yet to meet human resources that is fully functional in the way that they should function. And I think we put too much emphasis and too much hope on the fact that they do certain things that would be expected of them. The reality is they don't. No human resources will go through all the figures on your P45 to work out how much you were getting in your previous role. Now, if you think about why P45s are used, it's a mechanism in which they use to speak to HMRC about what tax you're going to pay and how they work out your tax and if they should add student loan. That's all it is. It's more for the finance team that probably sit in and amongst human resources, or for that particular person who sits in HR who actually interfaces with HMRC. That's all it's used for. It's literally to confirm your national insurance number, your name, and how much tax you've been paying. And they don't have like your... I think they have your take home after tax or whatever. It just doesn't go into, they don't go into that granular detail for you to be worried about that when you're negotiating your salary, about how your P45 and that. Let me dispel that myth right now. Another myth I need to dispel is about bonuses. People seem to think that they are entitled to bonuses. Now, the only thing that entitles you to a bonus is if it explicitly says in your contract that you will get a bonus every single year, which I'm yet to see an employment contract or any contract that has anything like that. Bonuses are discretionary, almost always discretionary, and partly is because some businesses don't make enough profit to be able to honour bonuses each and every year. Therefore, they say it explicitly in contracts now, or even refer to bonuses as discretionary. And there's usually a policy that usually sits outside the employment contract that basically goes into detail about bonuses. Now, those people who think they're entitled to bonuses, it'll be interesting to find out why you think you are. And the thing is, this is why I tell you guys to get your folders and your burn folders and your feedback folders in order. And if you don't know what a feedback folder is or a burn folder, that means you haven't been listening to previous episodes of the podcast. You need to go and listen to it. Because if you have your feedback folders, you're able to justify why you should get a bonus in times whereby maybe they have an organization has used their discretion, or maybe they've used certain metrics and decided that you aren't going to get a bonus, but B is going to get a bonus. Do you understand? So it's not like there's a blanket rule where there's no bonuses that year. You may not have qualified for a bonus because they feel like you haven't met your objectives. That's when you need to use your feedback folder. Or maybe you've qualified, but not qualified for the maximum. Or you think that you have been graded unfairly. That's where you use the feedback folder. But remember, this is discretionary. And if a manager decides that in their discretion, you are not entitled to a bonus, that is where now you need to be able to pull out your evidence to justify it. But for anybody who thinks bonuses are obligatory or they have an entitlement to it, you're wrong. Let's talk about sick leave. The way sick leave works is this. And usually, often and not, it's in your employment contract. But again, there's so many of you that just sign it. That grateful attitude, just sign it. Signing away your lives, but don't know what you're signing. Sick leave usually, what happens is if you're sick, there is usually a mechanism in the contract that says what you're supposed to do. So the start of the working day, or 8:30, 9 o'clock, whatever, you're supposed to contact a manager, and they sometimes stipulate how. So they might say by phone. What I do is if I have to register as sick, i.e. I can't come into the office, I usually send an email and I phone. And if I can't get them on the line, I leave a voicemail. If I can't get them on the line, I don't keep trying until they pick up. No, as long as I can prove that I've communicated that I am sick that day, that's all I'm interested in. Because sometimes there was one manager, she was always stuck on a train. So I shall wait 2 hours for her to release herself from the train before I can call her and tell her I was sick. No, I sent her an email, I sent her a text, and I leave her a voicemail. I'm done. Now, what happens is if you're sick more than 5 days, you have to get a doctor's note. Do you know how many dilemmas I've dealt with on my Snapchat where an employer, a manager, or usually some stupid person in HR who doesn't know their head from their bum says, yeah, I know it's day 1 of your sickness, but we need a sickness note. You don't have to give them a sickness note. In fact, most doctors won't give a sickness note until after 5 days. In some cases, it may be 7 days, but for the most part, it's usually 5 days. And usually that sickness note you have to pay for. So if they want a sickness note after day 1, then you tell them this is how much it's going to cost. I would expect you to pay for it. And this is what my contract says about sickness. And I'm just going to let you know that you're adding to the stress of my sickness by not following the rules and the governance process surrounding sickness. Some managers are just difficult and some of them are just ignorant. They don't know. They think that you need a sickness note from day 1. No, it's after 5 days. Then you have to give a sickness note. And my thing is, how am I supposed to, if I'm sick, how am I supposed to send the sickness note to you? Me, I scan it and send it to them. They say they want the original. I say, when I'm back on my feet, I can give you the original. But for now, take the scanned version. I've been in those situations before. And I just want to reiterate that you don't necessarily have to give a sickness note from day one. If it is requested of you, yes, it's something that you should consider, but they should then foot the bill. That organisation, that manager's department should foot the bill for it. And you need to put it in writing. That, and I've been in situations before like that, and I have written words to the effect of, "Dear Helen, on day one of my sickness, you have requested that I provide you with a sickness note from a doctor, despite the fact that in my contract and the sickness policy of this company states that a sickness note should be produced after 5 days. However, as you have made this unique request, I would therefore expect you to provide or pay for the sickness note. I can confirm, having spoken to my doctor, that the cost is £20. Please can you make these funds available? And once these funds are made available to me, I'll then proceed to obtaining a sickness note." I want to reiterate that this is unprecedented considering the policy where it states under paragraph of the so-and-so policy that a sickness note will be required after 5 days. I would also ask you to confirm why you are deviating from the prescribed rules in my case. And I would ask that I be given the opportunity to recover from my sickness so I can come back to work. Full stop. That's how I wrote dear. And then as soon as you do that, oh, I got no, Toya. I was just saying that it would be good if you could provide us with a sickness note. But in this case, you're right. As the policy says, after 5 days, if you feel that you will be sick 5 days or more, then please make sure that you give a sickness note. You know, when you start quoting the rules, it's like shaking like a leaf on a winter day. Stupid people. I want to talk a bit about probation periods. And so probation periods can be anything a company sets it as. So I want to say there's legally no obligation for an organisation to set probation periods. It's not a legal requirement, but organisations do. And it's an opportunity for them to see if they like you. But equally, probation periods is an opportunity for you to see if you want to stay in this company, whether it's going well. I've terminated a contract before during my probation period because I say it's just not a fit. You know, let's turn the tables and take control of our careers, as I said before. It's not one-sided anymore. The same way that they have a requirement for a particular skill is the same way that you have a requirement for a role, or maybe an organisation whereby it's more in line with kind of where you want to go in your career. So probation periods are usually set between 3 to 6 months, or I've heard 12-month probation, and I've heard 9 months. Me, I don't do that. Okay, the only time I have 9 months of anything will be a pregnancy. So usually probation periods and what is required from a probation and just anything probation related should usually be captured in your employment contract. So during that probation period, if you don't pass your probation period, then they can extend. But what I will always say is a few things on that. The first thing is some organisations, you know, maybe they've just decided that your face don't fit. Yeah, because I've been told that. And they extend your probation period. Usually, it's usually like a setup because they don't tell you what you would need to do to pass your probation period. And therefore, you're set up to not pass almost. It's not a good sign if you don't pass your probation period. It's very few people I've heard on a probation period extension that actually pass their probation period, but people do pass an extension to their probation period. Sometimes they extend your probation period because maybe they're interviewing other people for your role. So they set you up to not pass your probation period, and then they've got other people, maybe another person lined up to kind of take your place where they get you out. I would say that if you're in a situation where your probation period has been extended and actually you do want to stay there, and actually this has come out of the blue, or maybe you knew this was coming down the line, it's really important for you to make clear with them on paper, in writing, what you need to achieve during the extension to pass your probation period. And they need to be clear about how long your probation period is going to be extended by. It can't be open-ended. So if they've decided they're going to extend your probation period for a few months, you need to quantify what a few months mean. Is it 2 months? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? And I think during the period of the extension of the probation period, you need to make a decision about whether, number one, you're going to go ahead with this extension, and number two, what that means for you in your career. And also, you need to be clear with them that this extension to your probation period, is it going to go in your record? So when people ask for a reference, one of the questions may be on the reference. Did you pass your probation, yes or no? Because remember, it's matter of fact referencing, sticking to the facts. That may be one of it. So if an organisation then has a question, did this person pass their probation period? What box do you think they're going to tick? Because if it's an extension, you're going through, like if it's an extension period, they could say, no, you didn't, because really you didn't pass it the first time. Or if they say, yes, you did pass, and then they might write something there, probation extended. You have to ask them what the implications are of an extension to your probation period. And more importantly, will it go on your record? And you can ask the question, if I was to leave in 5 years' time, this is my best, I always say this, if I was to leave in 5 years' time, and a potential employer then asked for a reference, would you tell them? And then if they say yes or no, whatever the answer is, make sure you confirm it in writing to them, so you have an email where they answered how they would respond to a future or a prospective reference request. It's really, really important. And I say these things because I have been in situations, heard of situations where managers and organisations have used the probation period as a weapon. And it's really important that, during your probation period, be yourself. Everybody at one time, even that person that's placed you on probation, who you're reporting to, has once been on probation too, has previously been on probation. So don't look at probation as an opportunity to lick as much ass or brown nose as much as possible. It's an opportunity for you to work in this organisation and make sure that you're quite happy with the role that you signed up for. And don't be afraid to hand in your resignation at the end of a probation period if you're not happy. It doesn't look badly on you. When I've gone to interviews and they've asked me why I left the role, I said, well, I left during my probation period because I could see that during that period, it was an opportunity to see if I liked the role and whether I fit in, and whether there is a synergy between my views and the way I work and the way the organisation work. And in this case, there wasn't any synergy. I wasn't happy with the long-term direction of the organisation, and therefore their views on how I was going to progress, and therefore the JD was quite misleading, and I made the difficult decision to terminate the contract. Like, you're allowed to say that. People are not going to look frowningly on and badly on you because you've made that decision. It's all about the way you tailor the response, or you tailor the answer to a question about why maybe you didn't work through a probation, or you left quite suddenly. I also want to say that I was asked a few months ago about salaries, and I've previously mentioned it on this episode, but you don't have to provide proof to an employer of what you used to earn. And I've heard that there's some cheeky hiring managers or interviewers that have asked you to provide proof of what you used to earn. Here in the UK, that is not done. You don't have to provide proof. And actually, I would go as far as saying, unfortunately, I don't feel comfortable with sharing my payslip with you, just for data protection purposes. And also, the organisation I work with, that I'm in contract with, basically have made it quite clear that we don't share pay slips externally to third parties. You could use that as an excuse for not sharing it, but that's a cheeky a request. They shouldn't ask you to prove what you're on by showing your previous pay slip. I wanted to say that because this is a myth that people seem to think that they're obligated to share that, and they're not. Part of the reason why workplace myths exist is because of a lack of knowledge, and that could be just not knowing, or just not being in a situation where people share their experiences. What I hope this episode has been able to do is discuss, the effects of the coronavirus on the workplace, and also dispel or explain some myths that are held in the workplace. Now, there's plenty more myths, but these are the ones that came to mind, and I used and have heard through Snapchat requests and dilemmas. I really, really hope that, if anything, Toy Talk stands for having open, honest and safe conversations about the workplace. Now, I've always said that my audience and my target audience are Black women. And that's because I speak from the perspective of a Black woman, because I am a Black woman. and because Black women continue to be underrepresented in workplaces and we're not always chosen first. So I wanted to use my platform to choose Black women first. But my podcast and the Toy Talks platform is open to anybody who wants to learn and listen about the workplace, but it would always be from the perspective of a Black woman. Men and women alike are open to listen to the podcast, to share it. In fact, I'll be really interested to hear your views about certain things that I've discussed here on the Toy Talks platform and podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode today. I would ask that if you do listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the podcast. I read all the reviews, and I'm really grateful for all the ratings and the reviews that I've received so far. I would ask if you would share the podcast as well, share it with your family, with your friends. I also want to point out that I did a few Instagram lives last week, or by the time this goes up, it would be 2 weeks ago. And one of the Instagram lives was about negotiation. It was a high-level overview about negotiations. And I used the opportunity during the Instagram live to actually record it on my camera. And I've edited it and uploaded it to my YouTube channel. And you're probably thinking, wow, Toya, I didn't know you had a YouTube channel. Yeah, I do. I don't particularly like YouTube just because I feel like the algorithms are very biased. But during this period, I thought it'd be a good platform to use to communicate and definitely to share on the platform. So if you want to know how to negotiate your salary, then if you go to my YouTube channel, which is Ms. Washington, and have a look at that. And it's just a high-level overview of negotiation, specifically negotiating your salary. You guys know that on the 11th of July, I have a Toy Talks Live. It's my second live event, Toy Talks Live 2.0. Tickets go live on the 28th of March 2020 at 10 a.m. on Eventbrite. If you go to my Instagram page, which is Toya_Washington, you'll see all the information relating to where to get those tickets, and also the Toya Talks Instagram page, which is Toya_Talks. For those of you who are more Twitter based, my Twitter handle is Toya_W. Thanks everybody for following me here and listening to the podcast and following me on my other social media platforms. My name is Toya Washington and you have been listening to the Toy Talks podcast.